All right, me. It is Monday the 6th, and I have finished reading Lindsey Fitzharris's The Butchering Art. I read this today while substitute teaching, so reading this in a whole bunch of art classes was certainly a fun time. This is a book that, yes, it's about the like Victorian surgical methods and the movement of surgery from being a general practice to being a true science in a lot of ways. But really this is much more a history and semi-biography of Joseph Lister, who Joseph Lister is the person who is credited for basically creating the concept and the general usage of antisepsis in surgery, right? Which is a thing that like seems so natural now, of like, yeah, you want to be clean, especially when you're dealing with the human body, that you want to be clean. But that has only come across because of the general acceptance of germ theory, right? Which was popularized and became much more prevalent through the work of Louis Pasteur, mostly known for pasteurization. But all of this work occurs in the 1800s, and really from like 1850 to about 1870 is where most of this work occurs. And it's just one of these things that is so, it feels so strange to talk about and be involved with medicine and internal medicine, and not thinking that everyone should be clean while interacting with the human body, right? But that's, it's just the way of science, right? It starts off with talking about Robert Lipton, who, right, relatively similar names, Joseph Lister versus Robert Lipton, who Lipton is very famously the surgeon who has the 300% mortality rate surgery, of where he ended up killing the person he was doing surgery on, killing one of the dressers who was working with for him by nicking him with the saw, and then also killing a bystander, because this is also in the time of medical theater, and so people are doing these surgeries in public open spaces in a theater, but then killing a bystander because Robert Lipton would work so quickly that it would often not only distress the people around him, but if you were too close, that he might catch you with and scare you with his tools by pure accident, right? And so that is the world of surgery and of medicine that Joseph Lister enters into, right? Of where it is all about speed, all about quickness, all about strength, because there at this point is no general anesthesia, has just been commonly introduced through ether, also by Robert Lipton. I should say introduced by Robert Lipton to the English public, but was generally used by Americans at that point, I believe. But because of the fears of blood loss and the not understanding how things get infected, just then the feeling of needing to work with absolute speed rather than being precise with things. And yeah, it's a terrifying ordeal. This book is very graphic and very gory in a lot of places, and so it is not for the squeamish of heart. You know, not just for its subject matter, but also for it provides some very, very vivid descriptions of various surgeries that occurred, or experiments that occurred. There's one that at the very end involving a vivisection, which is the cutting open of a body while it is still alive to see how the internal workings are going on, which is horrific and horrible. And it's another reminder of, like, we can't place our current moral standings onto the past, right? Because there is so much in the world of where, in order for us to get to where we are, we have had to have done those things, as horrible and terrifying as they are. And so, it's not an excuse for things, right? It's certainly not an excuse for anything, but it is that we must understand and have an appreciation for what has been done, which has then helped us get to where we are, right? Especially in the world of science. So yeah. A great deal talks about these kind of backdoor politics that are occurring throughout Joseph Lister's life, because you're dealing with these ideas and concepts of, like, conservative versus progressive views on surgery, right? And even in the introduction of new ideas and new concepts that then inherently contradict or go incredibly against the current or the foundational ideas that this has all been based on, right? Especially into the concept of surgery not being a trade, right? Surgery, the view of surgery as a medicine and a medicinal practice rather than a trade of things, right? Especially when it comes to germ theory, right? And I think in modern lexicon, right, without having great full understanding of the historical ideas of animalcules and of miasma and, like, heat transfusion and things, right, is that reading this is like germ theory becomes an extension or a solidification of more of an extension and combining a whole bunch of these ideas to formulate a new concept, right? Versus, how these things get kind of portrayed, of where, like, miasma being of the bad air, right? And like technically, yeah, it's just that it's not the air itself, it is the bacteria within that is causing these things to happen, right? And so, like, in that sense, all right, and part of that is because I have this modern understanding, and therefore I have ability to backwards think into this, and so those kind of arguments don't always make sense to me, even though they effectively end up setting back England's surgery practices for like another 15 years afterwards, because of this general refusal to sterilize things. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and then there's quite a bit about, like, how did we get here, right? How did we get to this point of where actually we have generally accepted germ theory, and that is how we view things, and how we go forward with things, right? And it's so much just happenstance, right? It is this Joseph Lister being put in a position and being encouraged to go seek out places in Scotland, and then his not the head surgeon. No, it was the head surgeon, but the head surgeon, after Joseph Lister had been there for a while, the head surgeon taking a job as the head surgeon and the chief controller or whatever of the military, and so then that position becomes open for Joseph Lister to continue advancing, and then ability to advance in by these kind of constant weird situations that Joseph Lister finds himself in, where he's like just constantly able to move forward slightly, and gain more and more respect by having these higher and higher positions, right? And it is just another thing of, like, how much luck there is in progressing ourselves as a society, right? Going from the days of basically any sort of abdomen wound or chest wound or neck wound being almost guaranteed fatal, and chances of surviving any sort of massive arm or leg injury without amputation being incredibly low, and I should say fatality rates being very high, and chance of amputation for things being very, very high, to then the modern world that we live in now, right, of where we just expect hospitals to be clean, and we expect things to be sterile and all of that, right? So fascinating stuff. I think the final thing to talk about is what is actually the cover of this book, which is now known as the Gross Clinic. I don't remember the full doctor's name, something Gross, but the Gross Clinic is like this. I kind of like this last stand of this old practice of medicine, right? Of where Lister's ideas would eventually, or relatively quickly, became widely practiced in continental Europe, and then that shifted to the island of Britannia, and then America was like the last bastion of, like, just holding out and not wanting to move to this, and there wasn't a great reason why. They just refused to do it, right? And Joseph Lister effectively has to go on this massive tour in 1876 after the centennial celebration in Philadelphia, in which Lister is in attendance, and Lister just gets absolutely dunked on by so many different surgeons and general practitioners in the United States. And then Joseph Lister has to just go on this tour of the United States and give speech psychologists and perform surgeries as a guest surgeon, to show that his ideas had merit, right? And it's just this very, very strange thing of the history of American medicine, of, like, here is something that has been adopted and is pretty clearly showing results, and just refusing to do it for no real good reason other than it kind of upsets the way that things have always been, right? But yeah. Yeah. I think that's it for the butchering art. Very, very wonderful piece. Very, very graphic. You know, be physically prepared, I guess. But yeah, that is the butchering art by Lindsey Fitzharris.